February 4th, 2016, Thursday evening. On the 10th floor of the Central Bank building in Dhaka, a fax machine prints a single page, then stops working. No one notices it at that moment. The staff have already finished their work, and the building is gradually emptying out. But that silent piece of paper, the one that never came out, was the first sign that something, that night, was happening somewhere else in the world. In New York, where Bangladesh Bank holds its reserve account with the U.S. Federal Reserve, it was nearly 8 in the morning, and on the computers tied to that account, a series of requests began to appear. Money transfer requests, totaling close to $1 billion. This is the story of a bank heist, but unlike any other. There were no masks, no weapons, no blown open doors. All the perpetrators needed was a screen, an internet connection, and patience that lasted over a year. Bangladesh's central bank, like any other central bank in the world, keeps part of its cash reserves in accounts at major central banks, most notably the U.S. Federal Reserve in New York. This arrangement lets smaller banks carry out their dollar transactions internationally without having to convert their local currency every time. And like any bank account, transfer orders can be issued from it, provided those orders arrive through the correct channels, properly documented. To get to the story of that night, we need to go back to October 2014. Back then, an employee at Bangladesh Bank received an email. It looked completely ordinary, a message from someone applying for a job with an attached resume. But the attachment wasn't a resume, it was malware. Once the file was opened, the hackers gained access to Bangladesh Bank's internal network. But they didn't rush. They stayed silent, watching, learning how the system worked from the inside for months on end. Throughout this period, no security algorithm or internal staff member detected anything unusual. The hackers didn't attempt to withdraw any money, and they didn't suddenly alter any data. All they did was observe the daily routine, who logged into the system, and at what times, what permissions each account held, and what a normal SWIFT message looked like, down to its smallest formal details. This kind of patience is what sets this operation apart from most other breaches. What they were after was a system known as SWIFT, the global network banks around the world use to send money transfer orders to one another. SWIFT isn't a bank, and it doesn't hold any money. It's simply a messaging system, telling one bank, transfer this amount to this account. But banks trust those messages absolutely, because they're encrypted and tied to security keys unique to each bank. By February 2016, the hackers had everything they needed: Bangladesh Bank's own SWIFT keys and credentials belonging to real employees, enough to send messages that appeared, from a technical standpoint, entirely genuine. Thursday, February 4th, around 8 in the evening, Dhaka time, an unusual hour for banking transactions in Bangladesh. But the time difference was the key. In New York, it was the start of the business day, and during this narrow window, through the SWIFT network, the hackers sent 35 transfer requests, targeting Bangladesh Bank's reserve account at the Federal Reserve in New York. The total value of those requests? Nearly $1 billion. Most of those requests were sent to accounts in the Philippines and Sri Lanka. The destinations seemed varied enough to avoid suspicion, but in the end, they all led to one place: a network of newly opened bank accounts set up just months earlier under ordinary names, drawing no attention at all. And here begins a chain of small coincidences that would decide the fate of the entire operation. The first of these coincidences, the fax machine. The Federal Reserve was supposed to send a fax confirmation of those requests to Bangladesh Bank as an extra precaution. But the fax machine in Dhaka that night was broken. It received nothing. No one at Bangladesh Bank knew at that moment that 35 massive requests had been sent from their account. The second coincidence, and the most critical, the timing itself. Thursday evening in New York meant Friday in Bangladesh. And Friday in Bangladesh is an official holiday, the start of the weekend. So while their money was being stolen, Bangladesh Bank's staff were at home. From the Federal Reserve side in New York, things looked different. The requests came in, the keys were valid, so the system began processing them, one after another. Of the 35 requests, only 5 were fully executed. 4 went to accounts in the Philippines, worth close to $80 million, and the 5th, worth $20 million, was directed to a nonprofit organization in Sri Lanka. The rest, the remaining 30 requests, which would have added hundreds of millions more, were halted. Not because of some advanced security system, and not because of an alert from a smart algorithm, but because of a single word spelled incorrectly. One of the transfer requests, worth $20 million, was directed to an organization in Sri Lanka, whose name contained the word foundation. But whoever wrote the request spelled it differently. Fandation. This small spelling mistake, just 2 letters, raised the suspicion of an employee at the intermediary bank handling the transfer, Deutsche Bank in New York. The employee had no idea a heist was underway. All he saw was an organization's name written oddly, so he sent an inquiry to Bangladesh Bank to confirm. In the international banking system, any intermediary bank processing a transfer has the right to ask for clarification if any detail looks off, a name, an address, or even text formatting. These procedures exist primarily to combat money laundering and have nothing directly to do with detecting cyber attacks. The employee at Deutsche Bank was simply doing his routine job, verifying an organization's name before passing $20 million to it. He had no idea that the question he was asking would become one of the most important details in an international investigation. That inquiry, on its own, wasn't enough to stop everything, but it was the beginning. Saturday, February 5th in Dhaka. Zahid Bajat, an employee at Bangladesh Bank, walks into his office in the morning. Like any normal workday, he tries to print some documents from the Swift system, but the printer, this time too, isn't responding. He tries again. Nothing. He opens the system directly on screen to see what's going on, and in that moment, he sees something he never expected. Messages, confirmations, and inquiries from banks around the world about transfers that neither he nor any of his colleagues had issued. Dozens of messages relating to nearly $1 billion. At first, Bajat didn't fully grasp what he was seeing. The messages had been piling up for a full day, some asking for confirmation, others stating the transfer had already gone through. Every minute revealed a new detail, and each one was worse than the last. He called his colleagues who were at home on their day off. Everyone began gathering at the building, trying to grasp the scale of the disaster, while clocks in New York and Manila still showed that the workday hadn't started yet. At that exact moment, the race against time began. But the time difference, which had let the hackers begin in silence, was now the biggest obstacle to stopping them. By the time Bangladesh Bank discovered the problem, it was night in New York, and the weekend had already begun there too. There was no one at the Federal Reserve or in the Philippines who could be reached immediately. Bank staff tried sending stop requests through Swift to the Philippines and Sri Lanka, demanding the transfers be frozen. But the Philippines was also on an official holiday. Monday, February 8th, was Chinese New Year, a national holiday in the Philippines. So while every party involved was caught in a synchronized holiday, the money, sitting in accounts in Manila, was simply waiting for a new business day to begin. Monday, February 8th, at a branch of Rizal Commercial Banking Corporation in Manila. The 4 accounts are opened, the ones that had received the $80 million, and withdrawals begin. The withdrawals weren't just through other bank transfers, but in cash, taken directly from the branches. A large portion of the money quickly moved to currency exchange businesses, and from there to casinos in Manila. The money branched out, spread, and vanished into a complex web of accounts and intermediaries, at a time when authorities in Bangladesh were still just trying to grasp the scale of what had happened. With every passing hour, the gap grew wider. Between the moment of the theft and the moment of discovery, nearly 2 full days had passed. 2 days of overlapping holidays that no one had planned, but which served the operation perfectly. The question authorities around the world asked, as soon as the investigations began. Who is behind this? Who has the technical capability and the patience to carry out an operation of this scale across 2 or 3 countries over the course of more than a year? The American investigation, led by the FBI, traced the threads of the malware used in the breach. The code, its structure, and the way it was written bore striking similarities to tools used in earlier attacks, most notably the attack on Sony Pictures in 2014, and other attacks targeting banks in Vietnam, Poland, and Ecuador. All of these attacks, according to the investigations, belong to a single group known in security circles as Lazarus. And according to the FBI and the US Treasury Department, this group is linked to an intelligence office affiliated with North Korea. The Sony Pictures attack, which preceded the Bangladesh Bank operation by about a year, was directed at the company over a comedy film mocking North Korea's leader. In that operation, internal company data was leaked, along with private emails of its executives, and its internal systems were knocked out entirely for days. Security researchers, after the Bangladesh Bank operation, found that part of the code used in both breaches, even certain lines and variables within the code itself, were identical in ways too consistent to be coincidence. It later emerged that the Lazarus Group hadn't only targeted Bangladesh Bank. In the months before and after the operation, the group attempted similar operations against banks in Vietnam, Poland, and Ecuador, using the exact same method: breach the internal network, wait patiently, then send fraudulent transfer requests through SWIFT. Some of these attempts failed entirely, while others succeeded with smaller amounts. Bangladesh Bank, given the size of the reserves it held and the weakness of its internal systems at the time, was the biggest and most ripe target. In 2018, the FBI formally charged a North Korean programmer named Park Jin-hyuk as one of those involved in developing the software used in these attacks, including the Bangladesh Bank operation. But Park, if he truly exists under that name, was never arrested. North Korea doesn't extradite its citizens to face trial abroad, and the charge has remained, to this day, a charge on paper alone. The bigger question, one the investigations never fully answered: who wrote the name of that organization in Sri Lanka? Who chose the word foundation and misspelled 2 letters in it, turning a $1 billion operation into one worth just $80 million? As for the money itself, its fate split into 2 completely opposite directions. The larger portion, the part that went to casinos in the Philippines, largely vanished. It was converted into casino chips, then into cash, then exited the financial system entirely, leaving no traceable record. To this day, most of that $80 million has never been recovered. Among the names that emerged during later investigations, a businessman of Chinese-Filipino descent named Kim Wong owned several casinos in Manila. The stolen money reached accounts linked to him, and from there was converted into casino chips, used in long gambling sessions, before being converted back into cash, with a large portion withdrawn. Wong, in testimony before a Philippine inquiry committee, confirmed he later returned some of the money after learning its source. But a larger portion moved through other intermediaries to Hong Kong, and from there to destinations that remain unidentified to this day. But the $20 million, the one headed to Sri Lanka, whose transfer was held up by the spelling error, took a different path. The intermediary bank, the one that raised the flag, halted the transfer while it was still reversible. That money, the full $20 million, was returned to Bangladesh Bank, never leaving the banking system at all. $20 million saved because of how a single word was spelled. Another $80 million vanished across casino tables within just a few days. In the years that followed, authorities in the Philippines and Bangladesh tried to recover part of the missing funds. Some officials at Rizal Commercial Banking Corporation faced fines and penalties for their oversight of the accounts used in the operation. A small portion of the stolen amount was returned over the years through slow and complex legal proceedings. In 2018, the Philippine Central Bank imposed a record fine on Rizal Commercial Banking Corporation, worth roughly $20 million, the largest fine of its kind in the Philippine Central Bank's history. The bank's senior management was entirely replaced, and a number of employees who had directly handled the suspect accounts faced separate criminal investigations. And yet, the bigger question remained without a full answer. How did a group of accounts, opened only months earlier under ordinary names, manage to bypass every anti-money laundering monitoring system without triggering a single prior alert? But the larger gap, the part that vanished between bank branches and casino floors, remained unrecovered. And to this day, no one knows exactly who carried out each step of this operation on the ground, who opened the accounts in Manila, and who sat behind the screen that night, typing the transfer requests, one after another. Official investigations pointed to an organized group linked to a state operating with motives tied to funding programs restricted under international sanctions. But the operation itself, technically speaking, wasn't exceptionally complex. It was simple, patient, and built on a deep understanding of how banking systems work and how banks handle trust between one another. The SWIFT system itself, after this operation, underwent extensive security changes. New verification layers were added, and banks were required to follow stricter security standards to access the network. But at its core, the system still relies on keys, on messages, and on trust between parties that never see each other. In the end, all that stood between $1 billion and $80 million was two letters in a single word.